Hey everybody, this is Rydo, and we're back to another live stream of Shadowverse. Today is Monday, November 9th. Starting later these days, I suppose, or at least for the past couple streams. I'm just waking up later. Um, so, yeah, there's not really a lot to say there. I can say for the accountability section, I played all the way through Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is a point and click adventure game that doesn't even have background music in a lot of half of the scenes, I would say, let alone any spoken dialogue at all. Um, which honestly, for a game that if I recall correctly, was sold on 3 floppy disks, like I'm not upset so much about the lack of background music, and I'm definitely not upset with the spoken dialogue. What I'm upset mostly with it, having played it this time around and looking at it from a perspective of playing a game that was made for 89 in 2020. The biggest problem is it just doesn't have modern ideas and conventions polished at all for a point and click adventure. It's barely even a point and click adventure, really, because there is so many sections in the middle where you are going to get forced into boxing Nazis. So it kind of falls down to a boxing game with some dialogue choices around it. There's so much repetition, so much saves coming. Even as somebody who has played the game before and kind of knows most of the secrets, I still ended up having to box way more people than my life bar could handle. Probably a case where if you were playing that game on the original hardware for the time, the game itself would have just run slower, and that would have been a factor certainly also. That would have probably made that a little bit easier. Uh, but there's a lot of, like, almost all the dialogue from The Last Crusade is missing in the game. Like, it would have been very, very easy for someone to have just copy and pasted the script dialogue, even if it wasn't the finalized dialogue that would have shown up in the movie. They could have taken whatever script had been made and put it in the game and had a lot more conversations and cutscenes around that. Uh, wow, that might be a duplicate legendary. Yeah, I may very well have no, still just have 2, and I think you can play 2. So, yeah, a lot of dialogue. Many of the scenes in the movie are missing. Like the female lead character, who wasn't even, most female lead characters, even in the movies, aren't written very well given enough screen time. But Elsa uh, is given barely 3 scenes in the entire game. The Sean Connery character, which coincidentally he died as around the same days I was playing it. There was no motivation around that or anything, but that did happen. We were back to victory chess. Just a lot of grinding and playing today. And here you can see how much this character skin stands out. It's not even like a background art so much. Like, look at the background art you have for her or her, and then this is just barely even a pattern. We need to win with the Shadowcraft to get the daily quests. The daily quests are all just getting left over days after day after day. Uh, so, yeah, after playing all that and barely spending 5, maybe 6 hours playing Indiana Jones, this scum. It's actually technically called Indiana Jones and the Graphic Adventure, because there was NES games that were the action adventure and or the action game or something else. So there's like 4 different Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade games that were made, and the ScumVM one is the only one that is even slightly reasonable to play. And I would argue there's a decent conversation to be had to say that it's not really even that reasonable to play. The Indiana Jones series in particular is going to be a weirder one, in the sense that Fate of Atlantis then jumps the graphics up and the gameplay design up quite a bit, and interesting, this would evolve all other cards. Would there be potentially a reason why you would need that? Yeah, that's a card that definitely could synergize with some other cards that cannot evolve using evolve points. And so I need to keep an eye out for this card, Grimory. I didn't realize that was even a thing. And then after you play Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis, which I've played before many times, there's 2 other Indiana Jones games that aren't really sequels to the ScumVM series, but I think they work just as well in that mentality. See, I don't know if when you do a burial thing, does that count as coming into play and leaving play? You do a burial rite. On top of playing Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, I also did a spotlight for Pac-Man Championship Edition 2, which is just utter garbage. I think it sort of crashed. It minimized the screen, at least, randomly while I was playing it for an hour, but that's not even the biggest part. There's just no visual adjustments that are fairly consistent until you unlock at least the first half of the tutorial. You do the first half of the tutorial, and then it doesn't really push you to go and play the second part of the tutorial, which is fairly weird. But all it has is basically the exact same maps as the first Championship Edition, which Championship Edition 1, Deluxe Edition, or whatever it is, the deluxe version that's on Steam, is a great game. It's just like an amazing game. It doesn't exactly copy what the original Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man games are, which, in fairness, I think both of those games probably should give you a free copy of Pac-Man. They won't ever do anything with Miss Pac-Man because there was a lawsuit around that. But yeah, there definitely should be more yeah, there definitely should be like a way to play just basic Pac-Man in both games. But Championship Edition 2 changes all the things that were added in Championship Edition 1. You no longer have this bullet time slowdown. The sparks as you turn exist, but they don't work. The analog stick and the D-pad on the Xbox One controller was not adjustable at all, and just the controls were just terrible. It's just a terribly programmed game. It has an adventure mode that you have to go through the solo mode first to unlock, and the solo mode is just all the previous levels, just like all the previous content that was in the, well, it's not really the same content. It's almost the same content with new bad ideas, changing things. Pac-Man can't eat multiple ghost chains that can overlap, which there's really no reason why they can't overlap. He bounces into ghosts, so the game is stupid easy for something called Championship Edition. I literally took my hand off the controller, and it took it a good 35 seconds before it decided that I had bounced into the ghosts enough to irritate them for them to attack me and kill me. It's just somebody, had they done any game testing at all, would have very quickly recognized that there was major flaws with the concept and with what it was adding and what it was changing, instead of it just being the sequel to Championship Edition and thus having all of the elements of Championship Edition. It changes absolutely everything. It should be its own game. There's now like 3D boss battles that totally don't work for a Pac-Man game. The sides of the screen do not change when you clear all the pips on the side or eat a fruit like the first game. So it's not really as much a continuous experience as the first game. And overall, it was just real disappointment and real shame, and I could certainly complain about it a lot more, but there's really no reason. It's mixed reviewed on Steam, and the shocking part about that is that it's only mixed reviewed. It really should be negatively reviewed, and mostly negative, because I can't imagine anybody, even if they didn't like Championship Edition 1 or didn't like Pac-Man at all, I don't think, had that just been a discrete abstract game that did not have Pac-Man on its title and did not look like Pac-Man, I still don't think people would like it as a game. There is something to be said that while there have been Pac-Man mods all over the place when Pac-Man happened, the vast majority of them never became popular and never were played by most people. Even Pac-Man itself in arcades was always kind of its own little niche arcade style game. So yeah, that was disappointing. And then after that, I decided to squeeze in one episode of playing a community mod for Portal Stories Mel, which so far so good on that. It starts off kind of cloning / stealing ideas from the Half-Life series. You start on a train, which if you play Black Mesa or whatever Half-Life game that was, whether that was Half-Life 2 or Half-Life 1, where you start on the train, I think that's Half-Life 1, and Black Mesa is the remake of it. You would also start on a train. The Cave Johnson talks to you while you're on the train. It is a different experience to Portal 2 in that you're actually seeing like a underground city that the Aperture science people were working out of and living in, compared to the pure white testing facilities, which I imagine I will just end up getting inside the pure white testing facilities, but there's like 5 chapters, and in the first chapter I still haven't made it to that point. That I guess the general idea to take from that is that this is probably taking place before GLaDOS has fully taken control and rebuilt it. There's turrets, but the turrets don't look like the turrets in Portal 2. And it does start in the past, so everything's going to be kind of more of a prequel setup. What I didn't do over the weekend so much is work on my server, which is great news, I think, because I've been wasting a lot of time around that lately. And it was far past the point in which I needed to potentially take a break on that.
This bears further study.
The days still do seem like they drag on for me, though. It stinks, certainly. It just feels like everything takes forever, and that I have all the time in the world, and yet I still don't really accomplish as much as I would like to. And you know, that's annoying. Also, my computer's locked up a couple times. I'm hoping that that's because of the registry tweak that I have now undone, but if not, it's because I overclocked it, or there's something else. And it's a weird lockup. It's not giving a blue screen of death. Yep. And unfortunately, I think I'm gonna have to run to the bathroom, so this is gonna be a weird pause break I think we're gonna have to take. Yeah. I'm gonna have to concede here, I guess. Quit and forfeit. And I'm gonna have to take a break, so I'll be back in about 20 minutes. For anyone watching, apologies for that. Later. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. Let's get back to playing Shadowverse. Special missions available. Where are these? Like, are these just missions I already did? I guess they are, because I'm not seeing any other special missions. And we're still just stuck between either playing this Shadowcraft or this Shadowcraft, or spending the time to potentially build a new Shadowcraft deck, which it wouldn't hurt, but it's probably not going to happen too. There's just kind of this other lack of motivation, and I don't know if it so much has to do 100% with Shadowverse, or if it's just collectible card games in general. If I could think of something to play while streaming otherwise, I very possibly might consider that, but I just don't know what would be so grindy that I'd want to play it, and that you could even go for a decent amount of time. Because say I was to play something like Final Fantasy, or some other JRPG that was just like really, really long and really, really grindy, is that something that I could then stretch out and be interested in and also ignore enough to talk about the video game news? I don't know if that's really worth it. Absolutely not worth it. Jeez, I need to look at these cards. Some of the visual aspects that are displayed in Shadowverse still haven't really locked into me as to, oh, the glowing blue symbol means something.
Do you know the eternal void?
So a bit of a surprising boost of views, and I don't know what caused this. Castle Crashers episode 1 aired on my channel. I got a subscriber today. So maybe it is that the YouTube algorithm goes around in a round robin sense to recommend content to new people, and that my time this year has finally come up late into the year. Or maybe there's something just specifically popular about Castle Crashers that I'm not aware of. Like, Castle Crashers definitely was a popular game, but it's not a particularly relevant game at the moment, so unless it's just a case that the algorithm is built on old information that doesn't really take into account time, it doesn't seem like there's a good reason for that. Particularly since the video just came out. It would be very nice in 2020 to have at least one video that had some major success, got at least like 500 views, if not thousands of views. Like that would be nice. At the end of the day, it's still teetering around 400 subscribers, and unless that triggers something in the algorithm to suggest more things, yeah. Yeah, unless the algorithm said, okay, you now have 400 subscribers, we're going to now put you in a whole new tier, you're going to get a whole bunch more subscribers and views, and that's going to quickly, in the next 6 months, get you up to 1,000 subscribers. There's still seems to be very little hope for small-time YouTube content creators. I doubt video game content creators are going to get any kind of boost in the idea that, like, the US election is mostly finished and settled at this point, and thus there's less potential eyes behind that stuff. Yeah, I would have a real hard time believing that was the case. I'd more believe that they had changed the algorithm to de-emphasize political videos, but that's not what YouTube was doing either. They were, if anything, just pushing people to watch, like, the MSNBC, CNN, maybe even the Fox News videos over medium and small political talking heads or channels that wanted to talk about politics. And I definitely don't want to talk about politics, so let's move on. Because over the weekend I haven't been looking at the news that much, and frankly on the weekends there hasn't been that much news anyways. We don't have a ton of games. I say this almost every time. There was a good week there. I stopped saying that, frankly. But I'd also say, for some confusing reason that I can't fully explain, there does seem to be there does seem to be a increased focus around talking about some games that either snuck out and didn't get any kind of fanfare, or are coming out right now and are getting fanfare, but it doesn't really feel much like fanfare because, heck, like the release of the Xbox Series and the PlayStation 5 both have kind of fallen flat. They were kind of poorly timed around the U.S. election, but they were also kind of just poorly timed around things they couldn't have controlled. I would say it is kind of a failure every console launch for Microsoft and PlayStation to not try to heavily emphasize games that are available on day one launch instead of emphasizing the hardware itself. The hardware is fairly useless if you don't want to play any games. Nintendo has done a much better job of that, and in the past, in particular, Nintendo has done a really good job around that idea, because they've ensured that there was a lot of games to talk about for the Nintendo 64, a lot of games to talk about for the GameCube. They kind of dropped the ball somewhat on the Wii U. I think there was a lot of games, like even day one on the Wii, if I recall correctly. Particularly, I definitely remember the Nintendo 64 though, having VHS tapes and promo videos and just talking about a lot of games. And maybe that's just nostalgia and faulty memories, so more than anything else. But yeah, it definitely felt like they had 30 games on day one with the Nintendo 64 where that I was hyped about, whereas nowadays I would question severely if there are even 15 games worth mentioning. Reanimate 3. Come out wherever you are. Let's see. See, all I want to really do is play this card, even though I know I'm gonna lose, and I'm probably not gonna make it to that point. Alright, so let's talk about what games we have on Steam. We have a game here called Snowballers, getting kind of early into the Christmas winter spirit. A snowball fight idea isn't a terrible idea. Its release date is saying November 9th, 2020, but its depot from the Steam database was December 2019, and I vaguely recall this game actually coming out last year. The idea does make a decent sense. Try to be a little bit more child friendly. There is probably a problem with infinite snowboarding, and also hitting each other with sticks is not acceptable in a snowball fight. So then that really gets rid of the entire child friendliness aspect of this. This is 79 cents English. I bet it wasn't in early access last year. I bet they're just pretending like they're re-releasing it. And if that is the case, then that does go to show that Valve unfortunately lets people manipulate their release date in a way that should not be allowed, to try and trick people. What I vaguely recall happened, though, even last year when I looked at Snowballers, is that it just didn't look like there was enough of a game to really justify this. This feels like a mode you could almost certainly have in any first-person shooter, where you just change the graphics a little bit and the animation a little bit to make it look like a like you're throwing or shooting snowballs. Or you just have all the characters wearing Christmas hats, or things like that. Change the skins a little bit. I've never really seen a game that wasn't built around the idea of Christmas go all out for Christmas, and I think that's probably the right move. Like, while there are people that are crazy about Christmas, those people are also generally just crazy, and so they probably aren't playing too many video games, and they probably aren't buying. They aren't enough to be a target audience, really. Yeah, there's so many other companies and tchotchke sellers that make Christmas style content. Let's see, what does this do? Is there anything we can do here? Not really. Tech Raptor has an article here. Sam and Max Save the World Remastered revives a classic December 2020. I know one of the Sam and Max games does revolve heavily around helping Santa Claus, but I don't think that's this game, or if it is this game, it's like the final act of like a 4 episodic deal. This was a Telltale game originally, so this has to clearly be published by someone else. And it's just going to be a visual remaster. Sam & Max first season, yeah. With updated visuals. So probably every year they're going to just update the visuals and resell the same game. Unfortunately, people who own the original game probably not getting that. It's from Skunk Ape Games, which I didn't think that was the company that bought out Telltale, because I would have assumed that the new Telltale company would still go by the name Telltale. Otherwise, why bother to buy Telltale and all? Let's see. Yeah, you are getting definitely into a position where you're not you're not really capable of buying remasters of a game. It's just not reasonable to buy a remaster of that game when you already own the original game, and the differences visually are minimal at best. Do I want to kill this? And then burial something, and then... Nope. A Skeleton Viper as a card. That art is fairly different from all the other cards you see. Yeah, it's hard to be enthusiastic about playing a game that you played like less than 5 years ago, and it is being remastered. In all fairness to the remaster, this is more a personal problem for me, who played the Sam & Max games several years after it come out. Had I played it on day one, had I been a PC gamer, had I been a YouTuber at the time that Sam & Max Season 1 came out and played it day one, then there would have probably been close to 8 years in difference. But more and more we see these remasters are barely visual upgrades, and then they want you to pay a second time, which is one side of a very nefarious coin about digital ownership, which so far hasn't been terrible, but it has been fairly growing terrible in the live scenarios where you are required to potentially never actually own anything and potentially buy things over and over again and just become this cow that can be milked by companies over and over again. And then, without going into the same old rants about how copyright is fundamentally broken, how the concepts of fairness have been perverted by greedy corporations, this really is a great example of almost certainly no one who worked on Sam & Max Save the World is making any money whatsoever for this remastered version. The people who were paid to touch up the graphics, which for all we know could have been very little work, are probably just getting a relatively small salary, and then the vast majority of the money is going to the corporation, which then maybe the corporation is, in Skunk Ape Games will be using that money to fund a new Sam & Max game, which is what people really would want, but maybe not. It's also very possible that they will simply take that money and put it in their CEO's pocket, or make some completely different products that even at that would still be fine. Reinvesting in the company is way better than putting it in the pocket of upper management. But yeah, if anything, particularly in the case of Telltale Games, that corporation went out of business, that went bankrupt. The penalty for bankruptcy should be the loss of your assets to not debtors, in my opinion, but to the public domain if it is a digital asset. So it would be much better for society, in my opinion, had Telltale gone out of business and then every single one of those games was public domain. All that code was public domain. All of a sudden, every other video game company that managed not to go out of business can look at that code, can use it to improve their games and their programming. They can make spin-off games, and society would be way better suited. And even corporations in that scenario would probably be better suited, because if you had the likes of Ubisoft and EA and Valve and just every other company that wasn't Telltale being able to say, hey, let's look at this code, let's look at these art assets, let's see what we could do with Sam & Max, you'd probably get dozens of potential child projects based on Sam & Max. Maybe they wouldn't inherently be called Sam & Max games. I just cannot get this to... Cannot get this to work as well as I'd like it to. And then those other corporations could sell their products and make money. So you basically have to bury this. Then you have to do this. And then go ahead and do that. Then in the turn. But yeah, unfortunately, it's not the individual or society or what's good for society that makes the copyright rules in the US, and very possibly it never did. There definitely has been a thought where the idea of theft and copyright infringement, because very much to religious Christian people, that they think copying a file is theft, and they've been taught to religiously believe that, when in reality that's never what biblical theft was. Like, and this would basically get down to a theological argument that I haven't fully thought out and might have a little trouble defending. But when Jesus was wandering around telling the parables, telling stories and repeating stories, and when he was repeating the old books of the Torah, and what became mostly the Old Testament, or most of which became the Old Testament, might be a better way to phrase that. There was never any thought amongst any Jewish person amongst that time, who would be the predecessors to Christians, that Jesus was copyright infringing the Torah, and only the runners of the temple, I believe Levites, were allowed to tell the stories of the Torah, or read from the Torah, or copy a Torah scroll and give that. Like, that was never considered thought. Those ideas and like information as a society, even well before Judaism, was all about telling stories and sharing it with everyone, and that information should be free. Now, sure, video games, music, movie files are the natural evolution of information being free, compared to, say, repeating a story or a campfire story or a parable. But that's really what's that stuff was always free, and there's been this kind of like corporate greed that happened, and it happened thousands of years ago when the King James Bible and the printing press were invented, when they started selling Bibles to people. And even now you have large groups of people that try to give away Bibles to people for free because they want Bibles to be free. It shouldn't just be that there are groups of people giving away Bibles for free. There should be people's giving away all kinds of books for free. That's the whole idea of libraries at this point. And it's very silly to say libraries shouldn't exist because everybody should have to buy every single book if they even want to think about reading it. And yet that's exactly the argument that a greedy corporation would try to make, is that they would not want their books in libraries if they weren't inherently forced to have their books in libraries. And still they found shenanigan ways of charging libraries more than what it probably should charge, more than the cost of the paper and the development. But yeah, theft, as it is a moral wrong, and a lot of this certainly will come down to, do you define your morals based on Judeo-Christian beliefs, or do you define your morals elsewhere? But theft in general was always around the idea of depriving someone else of something. It was wrong to steal your neighbor's ox because you deprive your neighbor of the ox. It'd be wrong to steal your neighbor's ox milk, even though the milk is made every single day, but you're still depriving them of that day's worth of milk. It was never, ever considered wrong to potentially clone, if you could magically clone or copy your neighbor's ox and make 2 copies of it. There would be nothing wrong with that in the minds of early Judeo-Christians, because you're not depriving anyone of anything except for perhaps you're depriving some other greedy person the ability to sell that cloned, that magically copied ox to people. But that was never really a consideration, because thou shalt not steal is also right up there in one of the two versions of the Ten Commandments, with not coveting your neighbor's wife slash ox slash whatever. The anti-greedy anti-greed concept there. So greed was always a major no in Judeo-Christian values, until it stopped being a major no. And greed at the core of modern Christianity, which isn't even, not even modern Christianity, has been a pervasive, growing problem. And see, I'm making a copyright argument that's quickly boiling down to a religious argument, but like, ever since Catholicism became opulent and people like the Pope stopped taking real vows of poverty, there's been a major turning a blind eye, as it were, towards greed, both amongst Christian devotees and the infrastructures. And that's not just your $1 million California preacher. It's also the Catholic Church and the Vatican City, just being the entire Vatican City being full of priceless artifacts, full of gold, full of decorations. It is inherently the opposite of the example and the lifestyle that Jesus set, being a poor preacher traveling from place to place. And inherently, the parable of feeding the 5,000 is to get back to copyright, is the prime example of what Jesus would do in a modern time with copyrights. He went to a lake, which arguably in modern times, somebody would claim they own the lake, they own all the rights to the water in the lake, they own all the rights to the fish in the lake. That's how corrupt this world has tried to become. Well, no, he was given fish, I believe, fishes and loaves from people. I barely remember the parable now, but he was given a limited amount of resources, which definitely somebody would have claimed that they had the rights to providing more fishes and more loaves of bread. And then he literally magically duplicated it. He basically took an MP3 file that was given to him, and then he copied it. And he copied it, and he copied it, and he copied it. And in a funny way, this might very well be the first instance of what would be copyright infringement in the past. And frankly, we are not so far away from the idea that a corporation would claim the copyright on the chemical structure of bread or fishes, even like naturally created fish.
Avoid. It beckons me.
So yeah. Does that inherently mean it needs to be a complete free-for-all? If that's if that level of anarchy really is necessary to rebalance the scales, it might get down to that point. But in reality, there just needs to be more reasonable, more intelligent, more actual informed people in charge of making copyright law. And this will definitely be a concern, assuming that Joe Biden becomes the president, because there has been some talk already about him getting rid of some of the safe harbor divisions of the copyright law. So we may be in for some rough times, and like the Digital Millennium Copyright Act going the wrong direction may make outlaws of more people than it already has. Yeah. And so, yeah, we definitely need smarter, wiser people, reasonable people, people not on the take for large corporations. Inherently, all governments are have a tendency to be cronyistic and tend to favor rich large corporations, because it's the rich large corporations that can wine and dine them and lie to them and pretend like they're paying taxes. Inherently, usually most large corporations aren't paying taxes, and so they aren't benefiting the society that they're draining in either direction, either by creating content to entertain or help society, or paying taxes for having that copyright protection. And at a certain point, it might just require a new version of a French Revolution to limit or get rid of such large businesses. And one solution certainly there, as I've fallen directly into a economics argument, which I try to avoid, is the idea of limiting just the maximum size of corporations, the maximum income they can have, the maximum payout, 100% tax over $1 billion or on the corporation, or 100% tax over $1 trillion on a corporation. Probably should be somewhere around 100% tax around $100 billion on a corporation. Severe limitations where the CEOs can only be paid like 20 times the lowest paid employee in a corporation. So things like that could try to balance things out. At a certain level, it doesn't solve everything. If you have a Google-like company and they're just paying every single employee who works for them $250,000 a year, even the lowest employee, because what you can do at that point is limit the number of employees, or at least severely limit the types of employees that you hire, the way they think, the way they vote, the way they live their lives. Alright, but we're here trying to talk about video game news, and any new viewers today, probably I just scared off completely. Let's move on. We have a game here on Steam called Proteus. Just went on a huge rant there. This looks like an attempt at making Doom or Doom 3, as it were, without really calling it a Doom game and not having the rights to Doom. I feel like I probably would want to play Doom 3 at some point. I'm not sure which version I would want to play. Probably need to try them both. They are comparing this well, similar games to Doom 2016 and Doom 1. Third-party account, Proteus server, but single player, that seems weird. $24.99. I'm going to put this on the follow list because this looks interesting enough for a game running around shooting demons. But I also have to remind myself that there's definitely some caveats in that I barely played Doom 2016 and Doom 1, and I'm just not really a first-person shooter guy. You could also potentially play Proteus and not have like the chainsaw elements that refills your bullets, and so it might be a very old school experience where you are constantly running out of bullets and running into scenarios where you're just not well off in the game. Gamma Citra has an article here. Capcom says its customer information is secure following a cyber attack. An unauthorized third party managed to gain access to their internal systems during a recent cyber attack. Yeah, we'll see if that's true. Also in Japan, I don't know if there's really any penalties at all for lying and or just not really reporting accurately on a cyber attack. So I don't know how much you should really trust Capcom there. On the other hand, a question certainly to ask is who had their information stored on Capcom servers? Because I can't immediately think of a game that would have required you to log in and give information anyways. So more people may be safe than they think. Let's see. That and that. Moving on, Gamatsu has an article. Level 5 has trademarked the World Trick in Japan, the word World Trick, and Square Enix has trademarked Live Alive. And Dragon no Shima, Dragon's Island. Live Alive, which is an RPG for Supercom in 1994. So there's probably about 3 games that they're working on announcing. Of course, a trademark is a fairly early step to that process. Okay. Should have evolved this one. Oops. Here we have a game on Steam called Solitude? Wake Up? I don't know how you would... Seems like they misspelled Solitude. And it looks like it's a dark screenshot VR game. It's $16.99 English only. Horror game, obviously. I don't see anything of interest there. So that won't make it to the fall list. OpenCritic has an article here where it says Microsoft is looking to acquire game studios in Japan, according to Bloomberg, which would probably be Jason Schreier, who seems to be the only person at Bloomberg that, if I'm recalling correctly, he's at Bloomberg, that writes any articles. In a weird way, with Jason Schreier and Bloomberg and some of these non-video game news sources, they are trying to break into being video game news sources while also being oddly ill-equipped and in danger of losing any credibility they may have once had as a content creator. Because a lot of the news sources these days have lost a lot of their credibility in the eyes of many people in America. And that's not all just because of people calling them fake news, but a lot of it is that, but a lot of it also is just the fact that they've gotten worse and worse as far as making good content and credible content. and having good sources and relying on good sourcing.
Did he make it
A
all?
corrupted soul style will not tolerate evil.
Anyways, ignoring that part, there are some problems certainly with the idea of Microsoft acquiring a Japanese company. On one way, it sounds very interesting, but there aren't a ton of Japanese companies that are really on the table here. You can throw out companies like Sony, for instance. Sony of Japan is almost certainly not going to be purchased by Microsoft. If that did happen, that would be very weird. And frankly, Sony of Japan doesn't directly make any games anyways. You can throw out things like Capcom and Konami and any company that is big enough to really be recognizable. So that leaves you with a small selection of companies. They're mentioning, for instance, like Tango Gameworks, the team behind The Evil Within and Ghostwire Tokyo, which is being developed now. You could
I guess you're looking for
you
a
could
fight.
try to get companies like NIS and some of those companies. At a certain point, then Microsoft is either buying a company that makes JRPGs exclusively and does maybe a decent job with that, or they're getting down to the bottom of the barrel where they're just hiring companies that are making visual novels. And then the question becomes, inherently with any Japanese company that Microsoft might acquire, would they at that point be totally cool with the Japanese culture as it was, as it has its emphasis very often in anime characters that sometimes look a little short and sometimes look a little underage, and they're often lewd and often doing panty shots and emphasis on busts and butts and cleavage. Like, there definitely have been some instances where Microsoft outside of the Xbox company have gained power by joining groups. In particular, I'm thinking about the acquisition of not the acquisition, but becoming a board partner on the Linux organization, the Linux kernel organization, and then them inherently putting in a lot of SJW stuff that Linus Torvalds, who is the true and probably forever undisputed king of the Linux kernel, the person in charge, he's a jerk often to people, and people don't like that, but that lets him get the work done. And just like how Bill Gates was a jerk when he was in charge, and not Tim Cook. Tim Cook is probably a jerk too, but the Apple CEO Steve Jobs was a jerk generally in life, from what I hear. It often does take somebody who is a bit more ruder, and often the calls for civility in organizations like that, and calls for like inclusion and SJW talking points like that, become just the thing that infects and destroys organizations. And I would be very afraid if Microsoft, the gaming part of Microsoft, which does not, so far has not seemed to do any of that, but I would be very afraid if they were to get into owning Japanese companies, and all of a sudden the art style and the animation for these Japanese companies just don't look the same. It just doesn't have the Japanese mentality. And inherently, that may have nothing to do with anything that is ever said by a Japanese, a Microsoft overlord of a Japanese company. It may very well be that the Japanese people themselves get the impression and the feeling that they need to self-censor themselves now that they're owned by Microsoft, and that would be a real shame. And I just don't know if there is a great way to ensure that something like that wouldn't happen. So at the best, I could be cautiously optimistic around the idea of Microsoft buying a very, very small Japanese company to get their general feet on the field, as it were, and have some investment in Japan, and maybe that makes Japanese consumers more interested in buying the Xbox Series X or the Xboxes in general, which they have like no interest in that at all right now. And maybe that lets one small Japanese company make a lot more products that they wouldn't have been able to make anyways. If they came out with a real bold statement and they bought like the company from Sinran that makes like the Sinran Kagura series, and they said, we're not changing anything, we like the groping minigame, we like everything, keep on doing it like you're doing it, don't change a thing. Even at that, you just never know how many conversations are secretly happening in the background, saying change this, change this, change this. Or how many conversations are just happening between the Japanese employees who think they need to change things. At a certain point, I've always felt like the Japanese company should just tell the Western audiences, you're going to get our products the way we make it. We're going to translate it as literally as reasonable so that it's understandable to English, and that's it. We're not doing censorship. You're getting a Japanese product designed for a Japanese audience. If you enjoy that and you happen to not be Japanese, then good. If you don't enjoy it, don't buy our products. And that kind of is what I'd like to see Western people do also, all around Western countries. If Minecraft is kind of a great example. Like Minecraft, I believe Mojang is a Polish company or a Swedish company. I'll say Polish for this example. That's a Swedish company that made a Swedish product that a lot of other people liked around the world. When you have Microsoft using the Minecraft title to make Minecraft Dungeons, there you have a product that is designed to attract kids all around the world, and it's generic, and it's bland, and it's boring. I'd like to see a lot more American companies make games for America, for United States. I'd like to see more Canadian companies make more Canadian games that are for the Canadian audience. It's really ridiculous to play Life is Strange 1 and have a Canadian company then shift all of the events and all of the interactions into Minnesota to the point where there's just entire cultural differences and weirdness, and it just feels off when you play Life is Strange 1.
Sorry.
Yeah, we've got another quick disconnect, and that may very well be the only way we get any victories here. But we're getting treasure chests, so I don't think that's a bad thing.
I did it!
I guess the real question is, do I have any more Shadowverse, Shadowcraft decks that I need to play, or can I maybe move over to something else? I could play Dragoncraft now, so we can spice it up a little. There's also some just differences on the way businesses, at least how I know anime productions and projects are done in Japan. Like, Japanese companies will not do anything unless it's 100% safe and 100% guaranteed. So they'll create these merger companies designed to go out of business as soon as a single project is done. If the company succeeds and they make a profit, then the profits are split into the parent companies, but if it fails, then all the debt is laden on that merger company, and it never gets acquired by the larger company, which, yeah, that's just a very risk-averse way of doing things. It's a very different way of doing things. It's completely out of line compared to the way Microsoft likes to do things, where they own the company and they just invest in it forever. If my tinfoil hat conspiracy thought is correct, that Microsoft is really trying to acquire companies to get code and skill for people to make the next DirectX, because they're falling behind in the development of the next DirectX, it would make some small sense to have a, let's see.
These weapons are for hunting champions.
Yeah, it would make some sense
Get back here.
for them to have a Japanese company that would be more about making RPGs. There's very few JRPGs or RPGs in general being made in the West. And if they want DirectX to really support that, that's great. If they wanted to potentially have all the people who are using our RPG Maker to start using the next level DirectX instead, that would be great. DirectX being better at drawing cel-shaded anime looking characters would probably benefit them a lot too, because they are hitting the top of the line quality at this point, and I don't think they can get much better as far as what hyper realistic 3D graphics look like. And that is only a small percentage. Well, that's only a percentage of games. I would say at most 30% of all video games are hyper realistic 3D graphics of people, and then easily another 40 to 50% of those games are anime characters. And we don't want to see in the next DirectX game that the hyper realistic games look really good with ray tracing, but then all the 3D medium and low tier games look terrible, and they start to look closer to the art style of Borderlands, which is intentional in Borderlands' case, but you wouldn't want to see that with anything else. Here we have Gamma Sutra with the same article. Report Microsoft holding acquisition talks with a number of Japanese developers. Now would be just politically the right time to buy a Japanese company, because it's not like Japan or any country is doing particularly well due to the pandemic, and so you could probably get a cheap deal. But it's very questionable how any of these companies would integrate. Like, you buy a Japanese company because you have ZeniMax, and thus you use a Japanese company to make the next Elder Scrolls game, or you buy a Japanese company because you think a Japanese company can finish Double Fine Psychonauts 2. It's highly speculative that either one of those would be accurate.
There's a lot more where that came from.
We want to be alone.
Let's see.
Verifying access.
We work
Go ahead and play that.
Time to head home.
Yeah, Ninja Theory is probably the only one that even slightly would synergize with a Japanese company. And it doesn't really feel like they are trying to get these different companies. Hellblade Suna's Sacrifice is Ninja Theory's only game that is even slightly Japanese, I would say. Though the other games they made are like State of Decay, We Happy Few, Forza Horizon.
It won't be long now.
Yeah. So if there is some plan to have all of these game developers help each other, it doesn't really make sense. In all honesty, I'm not sure. If you look at this game on the remaster of Sam & Max Save the World, you see how it just goes widescreen and then the graphics don't really change that much. I'm not sure that they literally aren't just placing the mod that I think I may have already used when I covered this to make it widescreen. The graphics themselves may have changed absolutely none. And there might be some little tweaks here and there. But really, really hard to justify purchasing this game a second time. And what we can do is see Skunk Ape Games, and this is like the only thing they even have to publish. In a lot of ways, buying the remaster, which they're not even labeling as a remaster, I bet you can't actually play or purchase the old games. You can play them, I'm sure you can't. I bet you can't purchase them.
This bears further study.
You won't even feel that tremble.
Enemy identified.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Like it definitely does feel kind of like a Kickstarter in the sense that the implied thing being said here, without it actually being said as appropriately, is that if you buy this game and support this new company, Skunk Ape Games, maybe there will be a new Sam & Max game. And arguably, I'm not sure that unless they do it really, really well, that a new Sam & Max game may not actually be that good anyways.
With a bang and a boom.
Is this one gonna win, or can I possibly play Boom Devil? If this guy doesn't die...
This ends here.
Well, nope, he's just gonna win that way.
This victory is a testament to your strength.
Yeah, I think what I would boil down my decision to, had I not already owned Sam & Max Save the World, I think what it boils down to is I need to see Skunk Ape Games at least make an announcement for a new product of some sort. Like, I think that's really where that boils down to. If they never make an announcement for any new project, if they don't say that they're working on something besides just reselling the old Sam & Max games, then I don't know why I'd want to support Skunk Ape Games as a company to just give us remasters. Even if they were going to make the argument, and this is probably the weakest argument that would persuade me, that they are going to be much like some of the other companies we've seen where they just remaster old games. That might convince me, certainly, if they were to say, hell, we're gonna remaster this old game that we know you like, and we're gonna remaster this old game that we know you like. Here we can see Gamatsu has the same article here. coming out for Switch and PC. And I guess in fairness, this probably is the first time that it's been available on Switch. But there is major problems with the idea of building up a Switch library of games compared to like my Xbox 360 games, which I just recently went through, and I have quite a lot of them. Probably spent $400 or $500 on Xbox 360 games over 4 or 5 years. That seems about a reasonable amount. But unlike games of the past and consoles of the past, there's major backward compatibility with the Xbox One and the Xbox Series X and S. Pretty much anything that was backward compatible for the Xbox One, for as far as a 360 disc, is seemingly still compatible with the Xbox Series. And the only thing that isn't compatible is like Kinect games that would have come out with the Xbox One, and games that just generally were never compatible with the backward compatible in the first place. Is this a Machina character?
There's a lot more where that came from.
Let's see, this guy can only take 1 damage at a time, so we're gonna have to next turn attack him and then attack her. Otherwise she'll summon a new one. So yeah, I'm in this opportunity, if I were to choose to get an Xbox Series X, and almost certainly the next console too, where I could plug in many of those discs and play them. And sadly, there is probably 4 or 5 games that I bought either in just half asleep stupor after working really hard at a job I had during the time I was playing the 360. Like, and there definitely are a couple games I bought twice, probably for the same reason. Either that, or people just gave me copies of their games when they got rid of their Xbox 360s, which would have been a mistake. But yeah, there is probably about 5 games there that I just never would have played at all. And I looked at them and I'm like, why do I even own this? Like Call of Duty, for instance. Like, was I really at some point thinking I was going to play Call of Duty? Even now, I kind of dance around that idea, but it's way easier a decision now to do that. It makes a lot more sense right now to potentially play a Call of Duty game and make YouTube videos around it versus just playing it for my own personal experience. That was a weird way for that to happen.
Ready to witness my true strength?
It's a little surprising that this card does not work better than it does, or get played more. Moving on, we have a Gematsu article here. A 13 remake has a launch trailer. 13 is a game, and that's pretty much all I can say. Well, if these videos are going to be this large, I probably need to zoom out. This looks to me like it's a full remake and not just a remaster. So that looks like there might be something there. But I can say 13 is probably not it's probably not something that I'm super interested in playing. See that? Like, it's full screen. If I do, I could go full screen, certainly that too. You know what, it probably isn't a terrible idea to chop off the top and bottom while showing these videos. And it's not actually chopping anything off anyways, because it's just the player settings. 13 looks interesting. It kind of looks like something in a visual style like Borderlands. Well, I imagine it came out well before Borderlands. And kind of comic booky, cartoony. It's really a great example of the type of game that a new DirectX could focus a lot more on and try harder to make sure that these graphics look better. Moving on, we have In 7 Day Reflections, The Legacy of Mass Effect, which I guess November 7th is In 7 Day, and that really came and went with very little fanfare, even though they did announce like a Mass Effect trilogy bundle remaster that they're gonna sell. Like, I think there probably are just gonna be some diehard fans of the Mass Effect series that will never stop being diehard fans of the series, but I think the vast majority of people have fairly well abandoned that fandom because there's really not much you can do.
Spread your wings, proud and spread your mighty wings.
Let's see.
Burning flames will freeze.
Spread your mighty wings. You have angered
There we go.
never wake again. Never freeze.
And we can hit that. Then we can hit that.
I knew this would happen.
Still fairly easy to lose. Here we have a Tech Raptor article, Zhuan Sword 7 review, which you kind of know that they don't have a lot of games to talk about when they're talking about a Chinese game that apparently has 6 predecessors and we've never heard of it. This doesn't look bad. It kind of feels like Heavenly Sword. There's almost always a giant deformed monster character, and here we have a like goblin character. Some other monster characters. Maybe if this was a really, really good game, I could overlook the drastic Chineseness of it. But I think that kind of constantly becomes a problem with these so many Chinese games that exist. They gave it a 6.0. It suffers from a weak story, poor translation. Despite this, there's a lot to love about for a action RPG enthusiast. Pros fun, simple gameplay, stunning visuals and sound. Cons underwhelming narrative, poorly balanced combat, and occasionally dodgy translation. And see, this guy looks like he's new as far as a staff writer at Tech Raptor. Now really would be the time for all kinds of video game critics everywhere to start really embracing, reviewing, embracing and reviewing the RPGs that exist around the world. Oh, there's like literally no way to defeat this guy, is there? Like literally no
as
way.
you desire. This was foreseen. You won't even be moved.
Yeah, he's just gonna constantly respawn.
These weapons are for hunting dragons.
Spread your mighty wings.
Yeah. unless you have a banish card, you've lost. So either make them run out of cards, or
The flames are fading.
lose. And as a Dragoncraft player, almost certainly there's no way. It's kind of a shame though that game wasn't better received. But there definitely are like samurai games out there, and but those aren't Chinese as much as they're Japanese. Like I guess maybe not Dragon's Dogma. Shinmu is possibly the closest thing one could have to a Chinese focused looking game.
My speed is second to none.
Okay.
I shall give birth to a new world.
Unlikely I'm gonna be able to get this guy to.
This
Wow, it
victory is
destroyed all
strength.
my guys that had ward. It was that amulet that was giving ward to each of those characters. Oh, so there's a whole strategy there that I didn't understand. Alright. Moving on, Gamatsu has an article, The Dark Pictures Anthology House of Ashes, announced for PS5, Xbox Series, PS4, Xbox One, and PC. They drastically need to create a better labeling system for this. There needs to be just X5 and P5, and then X4
I guess you're looking
and
for a fight.
P4, and then PC. I guess still is as good of a description as any. Here you have just a teaser trailer. The thing though is that we keep falling further and further behind. There's Pazuzu. Looks exactly like the statue of Pazuzu from The Exorcist 2. Which probably looks exactly like the actual statue of Pazuzu somewhere. Yeah. I'm falling further and further behind as far as the Dark Pictures Anthology if I'm going to try and catch it up. So maybe if there's a big Black Friday sale, there might be an argument to getting one or two of those games. It is also worth mentioning that it seemingly so far seems like they're trying to get the Black Friday sales out earlier and earlier, and the Black Friday sales seem to be more and more pathetic, as it were, just not really worth looking at.
Get back here.
I imagine businesses are struggling, and supplies for video games and are going to be short anyways. I saw a bundle for Mario Kart 8 and Switch, but I'm not sure that you're even getting the new version of the Switch in that bundle, or if you're just getting an old Switch model still being in inventory and in stock. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some decent decent digital sales instead. A lot of like buy gift cards, buy this, buy that. I wouldn't be surprised if we see major increases in gift card purchases this year. Moving on, Gamma Sutra has an article, HD Games profit dips as at Square Enix following Marvel's Avengers launch. So their HD Games business dipped because Marvel Adventures was such a major flop. And that's a little bit disconcerting for the Marvel card game that Second Dinner is working on right now. Is that, are we potentially going to be in such a bad position? We're having a lot of internet trouble at the moment. Yeah, there's definitely a question, I suppose, there as to maybe the field for potential Marvel games will have been, the well will have been poisoned, as it were, or there just won't be that much interest in Marvel games with the whole pandemic, and there very possibly not being a lot of Marvel movies coming out. The whole fandom for Marvel movies may have to be attempted to be rebuilt, or it may just be gone forever. I still kind of feel like a Marvel collectible card game has a very high chance of success, but there are definitely a lot of ways to screw it up. Here, TechRaptor has a review for Bug Snacks. Bring all of your friends together. Again, this feels like this probably should be a little bit smaller. I didn't realize that Bug Snacks had been out, or was already out. They gave it a 6.5, which, in all fairness, if you are going to rush out a game and make it so that I don't even realize that it is out, I wouldn't be surprised if it is actually a lesser quality experience. Let's see, so I can get this down to like 75 before the images start to get a little ridiculously small. As far as what it says, Bugsnax is a very cute game that features a diverse cast of characters but suffers from repetitive gameplay. They were particularly quiet about the elements of Bugsnax and what that game really was. So it's kind of not surprising that it's only being reviewed as a 6.5. The pros are it's a cute, colorful world with a diverse cast of characters, which at this point I'm not sure I even trust the phrase diverse cast of characters, because I'm not sure what that really means in the minds of many writers. The cons, it can be repetitive and it's very short. Bugsnax definitely feels like it is a really, really weird concept that couldn't have gone very far, or that they just didn't have the skill to take very far. There is definitely reasons why almost every game is set in a fairly commonplace world where there are humans, maybe there are monsters, but typically up is down, left is right. You have to eat food, you have to sleep. We don't get into crazy differences where you're playing as creatures you've never seen before, and you're and you're eating anthropomorphic food items that then modify your body in some kind of Cronenberg-esque, cutesy Cronenberg-esque body horror modification. Yeah, Cronenberg is probably a great example. Like the Cronenberg movies with body horror don't appeal to many people, and even to the people they do appeal to, they aren't really the default. They aren't what those fans expect in every movie. And the idea of making an avant-garde Cronenberg video game is very ridiculous unless you're going to make a small indie game and basically give it away for free. which is not what Bugsnax was doing. In fact, Bugsnax advertisement is the most recent example that I've seen, and I haven't seen an example in quite a while, of trying to just dazzle people with BS and hide the fact that your game is in no way going to actually succeed, and you probably know it.
You are free, my darling. Soar.
Do we want to evolve this?
Ready
Sure.
to witness my true strength? Witness the unstoppable soar.
Unbelievable.
Here we go, that got us 2 5/5 dragons. Moving on, we have a game on Steam here called Azalea, which, if this was Bugsnax, it would make a lot more sense. Seems like it's kind of a top-down, Zelda-esque game. Cute, short, puzzle action adventure through a tense and dangerous forbidden forest. It's $1.34. It's English, allegedly full audio. I'm going to put that on the fall list. That's an easy choice. Whereas Bugsnax, we will see in a second, I imagine is on Steam. And it's probably a lot more expensive. Here's the Gametsu article I was talking about. Switch bundle with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe and 3 months of online membership headlines the Black Friday days. Not 100% sure this isn't the old Switch. You also have to consider that the whole Joy-Con drift issue is still an issue, so, and I'm not sure even if you got the newest version of the newest model of the Switch that has actually been addressed. Mario Kart 8 is a fine game, but it's also kind of online dependent. It's selling for $2.99. Let's see. At what company? Apparently several companies. Yeah. So there's...
Victory is exhilarating.
That's probably the best deal you're gonna get. I'd love to get a Switch, certainly, but I don't think I can justify the price. Yeah, I think it's fairly hard, even if you're buying a Switch for a kid, to justify the price. Alright, well, we don't have anything we need to do now. Of course, there's been weeks worth of daily quests I've missed out on. So we'll just get victories to get the treasure chests. And that's that. Here we have a game on Steam called Cyberpunica 2020, which is a jigsaw puzzle with some anime characters, and an anime maid. Just kind of a low effort Chinese game, I guess. Would be my guess. It's $1.19. It's English only, so maybe not Chinese, maybe just a low effort Western game. All of these anime images could be stolen or pre-purchased or like bought. And incredibly simple jigsaw puzzles being shown. And it definitely is very vertical, which implies that this is almost certainly a cell phone game first and foremost. Next, we have a game on Steam called Drilly Willis, which looks like it's a joke game. Wouldn't call it particularly a troll game at the look of it, just some weirdo person making a joke game, something that I'd just not be able to relate to. $7.99 is a bit of a troll, certainly. English full audio, so that's easy enough to ignore. It feels like when they are giving away free treasure chests, there are just people that disconnect to try to get you to win, but also it could just be that I'm having network connectivity issues, and that's why things are disconnecting. Next, we have a game on Steam here called Mason Brick Building. There's a level of visual softness on these 3D polygons that I would not generally expect. But there's a problem certainly around the idea of what looks like a 3D modeling software being sold as a game, particularly like the idea here I imagine is to be something sort of like Minecraft but set in ancient Egyptian / Greek times. It doesn't seem like there are many options outside of those two times. Um, and in a lot of ways this might be more of a demo software being sold and an asset flipped. So you definitely wouldn't want something like Assassin's Creed to look like that. But if there was like a puzzle game and the characters looked like that and they were just standing around and they were like statues or frozen in time, that wouldn't be terrible. But as for what it's really selling as a 3D modeling software, you could do better by using a real 3D modeling software. And I don't know who really even has a desire to build only buildings based on old building mechanics. $8.99 English only. It's also fairly expensive. Next we have a game on Steam here called Dogeran, which looks like one of these Game Boy inspired platforming games. Very possibly a frustration platforming game, which in all fairness, a lot of the Game Boy games that were platformers probably were fairly frustrating also. They tended to not be anywhere as fair as they should be. Yeah, there's nothing here that interests me. $3.99 is a decent price though. English, Portuguese, Brazil, language, Portuguese, German, and Spanish from Spain. Let's see. Let's go ahead and kill that.
Don't look so disappointed.
Next we have another weird looking game called Nyaf, N-Y-A-F. Nyaf. And if any of these videos or screenshots wanted to load in, we could see more of it. Find the hidden characters, find the hidden secrets, the hidden games, the hidden codes. So there's just apparently a ton of hidden stuff all throughout it. 532 English only. Just like none of the images want to load. So let's reload the page. That one. And then that one. Let's try this again. You can see these videos are all over the place. And typically when you see like these full motion video advertisements that aren't highlighting 100% of the graphics in the game, then 100% of the graphics in the game aren't that good. You can see some of these screenshots look just downright weird and awful and pointless. Like why even have a screenshot that is just a blob of colors like this? So, yep. Just a natural lack of quality there. Okay. How do we want to do this? We want to probably kill this. Probably want to kill this. And then end the turn. Didn't play quite right there. Because I have 9 cards in my hand. TechRaptor has an article here for the review of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, which is yet another game that I did not realize had come out. And here, I guess this is 2 female Vikings, which I don't think females were allowed to be on boats with the Vikings historically, but I'm sure they would break that rule. It's really weird for yet another Assassin's Creed game to come out and and there not be much fanfare for it, but that they have definitely been coming out way too often and way too early. There was also a video, I don't know what it inherently was trying to prove, showing that there was weirdness around the idea that you just don't have a good animation for the characters in Watch Dogs Legion, a different Ubisoft game, when they walk and wade through water, compared to Assassin's Creed Black Flag, which is a much older Assassin's Creed game. So apparently that code and those animations in part had been done, and then they just got left on, they got forgotten about when the newer game came out. Of course, there's probably a good technical excuse as to why that was the case, but it certainly doesn't look as good as it should. Summons a dream rabbit.
It won't be long now. So
Take a second here to actually play. I can see the beginning of the end as far as the news is going, but still a whole bunch. Yeah, we have a game on Steam called Cyblock, which is obviously a game where you're bouncing around as a block. These graphics are far too simplistic to pass muster. $3.19, English only. No to that. Yeah, we have a game called Dreamlight. Seems like we have a rather high number of like ugly low effort games this weekend. Probably in anticipation of Black Friday. We probably will start to see a lot worse games. 2D Exploration Sandbox is what it claims to be. It's early access for $2.99. It's English only. And visually it's just such a huge turn off that no way that would make it to the fall list. At this rate, the fall list may not need any cleaning up for another couple months if we're going to get a whole month of basically nothing. Can we evolve?
this ends here.
The whirlwinds will rend you.
And then we can do that.
Till we meet again.
The power
And
of
then we can
nature.
do that.
Till we meet again.
And then we can do that.
Not one for pranks.
Hmm.
Till we meet again.
And then we can do that.
Let's play.
Next, we have a game on Steam called Biocrisis, which looks like it's a shooter where you're shooting zombies, but it seems to be fairly designed around the idea of using a mouse and probably moving too fast, and yeah, I just don't think this works as an idea. Like, even if you did have a light gun for this, you would need a fairly large screen to adjust to make this 4:3 ratio really make sense. Like, and if you told me this was an old game, I might believe you. It's English full audio, $2.99. Seems like you only have to go through rounds of 60 seconds, which is a fairly short amount of time.
I've been spotted.
Hey, let's play.
Let's see. Next, we have a game on Steam here called Cookie Store, and you can see all these anime-like characters are blinking. Of course, the problem here with having so many different people and having them blink at the same time and move is it becomes very visually distracting. But I imagine actually in the game you very rarely have more than 1 or 2 people on it. Seems like it's a match 3 type game, kind of like Honey Pop, with some visual novel and dating sim and casual romance or comedy, but it's instead $13.99 and maybe doesn't have any adult content. It's English and Polish. See, all characters 21. Suggestive scenes, dialogues, and jokes, and swimsuits. So, according to the description, all you would get is swimsuits here. And at a certain point, I don't know what you're doing. If you have like a 16, 17, 18-year-old that tells you they want to play Cookie Store, I think you just say, no, just play Honey Pop. Just play Honey Pop and don't use the adult patch to see nudity, or play Honey Pop and use the adult patch at that point. This really feels like this is just too much of a milquetoast idea as it's being displayed. The match 3 elements you could certainly get without the anime and nudity and the dating sim elements. And if you want to go for the dating sim nudity elements, you already have Honey Pop as an option. So I just don't feel like there's actually a target audience that exists for that kind of product.
Should have seen this coming.
There we go. But I will say Cookie Store, in fairness, looks fine, and I would like to play a Polish game, but I'm not gonna work backwards to play a Polish game in particular, but to play something so simplistic. So I'm gonna say no to that. Make an executive decision.
And I just might save you.
There is also probably very little in the way of quality as far as the visual novel and story elements in any game that's labeled a dating sim, because you kind of know what's going to happen then. You know the goal, you know the turn of events. Next, we have a game on Steam here called Slime with a Sword, which apparently is a slime with a sword that jumps around and slashes grass and maybe pops balloons with dynamite on them and other things. It's $3.99 English only. It seems like it's just far too simplistic an idea. There we go. And then we do that. And then do that. And then in the turn. Yeah, if he can't do something to block me, I think I can win next turn.
Should have seen this coming.
See, next we have a game on Steam called Swing Dunk, which looks like it is basically Rocket League, but you're playing with characters that are apparently on like hoverboards, which there might be a bit of a twist to that idea. And you're swinging the ball over the place, dunking it more like a basketball. Slight differences there. Enough of a slight difference to potentially catch my attention. Free to play. And English and Korean. I'll put this on the follow list. Of course, there's a high chance of failure on that also. Alright. What can I do to get rid of do anything really?
Are the brightest stars in the sky.
Let's see.
The forest abandoned me.
She's not letting up!
I've been spotted.
Okay. So if he can do 3 damage, he can win. if he can't, and I can take down this character and then attack with the other two characters, I win. But he definitely has 8 cards. Gamatsu has an article here. Ranshima Montagari Layerland Story Sojo no Yukujo remake is coming to the Switch on November 12th in Japan. It's currently available on PC via Steam. I don't recognize this game, so it must have been on Steam for a while. There's a remake from a 2009 PSP title. I'll look at the trailer and see if there's anything interesting to mention there. Almost certainly there isn't. Destroy an enemy or an amulet. You can kill that. And then do that. And then that. And that.
I envy you.
What stinks about these treasure chests, though, is that you only get them after a certain number of games, and it seems like the certain number of games seems to be fairly randomized. So it is a case where you are just constantly playing over and over again without even being told what your goal is. Speaking of playing games, I was able to install the soft launch of Destiny Child spin-off game War. It's something War. It's definitely like a brand new game with no real polish on it. It has the Destiny Child characters in it, but then they're not drawn as lewd. They're censored outfits, and it is, for lack of a better term, I would describe it as a strategy tower defense game, where you tap a single button in the middle of the screen to summon characters randomly on a board. The characters will attack the creeping enemies from the left that are curving around to the right. They go up and then to the right and then down towards your leader. You can merge 1-star characters to get a randomized 2-star characters in most cases, although different characters sometimes do slightly different things. Then you merge the same 2-star characters to get a random 3-star character, and then you merge the random 3-star characters to get a 4-star character. There are 5 buttons on the bottom of the screen that represent the 5 different characters in your loadout, and you can upgrade their attacks on top of their attack being just upgraded because they're a 1-star, 2-star, or 3-star, or 4-star character. And then there's a button in the lower right corner that just gives a power boost based on your hero ability, and it seems like there's really only 3 heroes at the time. I'm playing it right now mostly because I'm bored, but even the very first time I played it, I was like, yeah, this is not going to work for me because you can't automate like you can in Destiny Child. There is nowhere near as much you can do in the game. There's nowhere near as much to collect, and what you would be collecting would be just the censored artwork of the same characters you have in the regular game. There's no real gacha elements that's interesting in it. And so, yeah, it just feels like they took a kind of generic game and put the Destiny Child art on top of it. And I imagine that's what everybody should have expected. There's no big surprise there. As for this game that I was talking about, let me click on that link and we'll mention it some more. I would still heavily recommend people playing Destiny Child if you're of age and okay with playing playing games that are mostly automated and or can be mostly automated and have a bunch of lewd characters and tell a really good story quite often. So here's that game on Steam. It seems to be mostly a fantasy game. There's some characters, maybe some RPG, maybe even like simulator, daughter raising simulator type game. But you can kind of see if English is supported here, it is not being shown. Oh, but I do notice that in the language bar they have this labeled as a L as in language equals Japanese. So let's see what happens if we undo that. Yep, when you take it out of the language being Japanese from Gematsu, it clearly says the English language not supported, Japanese and Chinese. So, yeah, it definitely would make sense why this is not on the consideration list. Let's go ahead and play that. And then evolve that.
It won't be long now. So sparkly.
We'll hit that. Not gonna win in this turn, so we'll play a little defense.
Truth is waste.
Next, we have a game on Steam here called The Trap Remastered, which I've never heard of. The Trap. It does look like it's a horror game where you're running around. This game includes inside the Buzalahadza monument, which I have no idea what that is. I'm seeing just some kind of generic, what looks like player versus player content. Also, how can you have a remaster of a game and then be early access? That seems just ridiculous. Third-party Steam DRM, which they're labeling Steam DRM. Third-party account, Steam account. So they haven't even filled out their own page correctly, because what they're really saying here is that there is no third-party DRM or third-party account, because Steam is the second party in this case, or first party. Yeah, Trap Remaster is $29.99, and there's just no level of polish even on their store page that would justify playing that. 4-match win streak, making bits of progress in the battle pass. Sure, if I were to spend all my time just playing Shadowverse as the Forcecraft character, I imagine I could get a lot higher and get the battle pass done before December 31st, but I'm just not sure I want to do that. I'm fairly certain I don't.
Time for me to prove
Next, we have a game on Steam here called Robotic Brutality 2020, and then you have like paper cutout advertisement, and it's just not professional. It's definitely not professional. But apparently that's what this game is, and at that point I don't think so. I don't think I could play a game around that idea. Even like the South Park visuals had to really be brought into realistic video game visuals for the South Park games. This is $1.53 English only, Robotic Brutality 2020, not making it to the fall list. TechRaptor has the Tabletop Holiday 2020 gift guide already out, which these are tabletop games, but I guess they already pretty well know what is going to be available, since I imagine tabletop games do probably have to be on store shelves a little bit earlier and developed. Here's Gematsu with the article we were talking about before. The Mass Effect Legendary Edition has been announced for PS4, Xbox One, and PC. Includes targeted enhancements for PS5 and Xbox Series. So The includes the remastered versions of Mass Effect, Mass Effect 2, and Mass Effect 3. Each game has been improved with updated textures, shaders, models, effects, and technical features. A modernized experience, super sharp resolution, faster frame rates, and visual enhancements. Includes all single player based content and downloadable content from the original games, as well as promotional armor and packs, all re-optimized and remastered and optimized. So that does sound like everything you would want, with perhaps the slight exception in the fact that unless the remastered versions of Mass Effect 1 change the gameplay controls to be closer to Mass Effect 2 and 3, you still very possibly are going to have a scenario where playing the first game feels very different from playing the second game. And you still just overall have the problem about, is there really any relevance for the Mass Effect series, or did they just drive it into the ground with Andromeda? It's a little surprising they didn't just throw in Andromeda as it is, too. Everyone who buys the Legendary Edition gets a free copy of Andromeda. But I imagine they want people to forget that that exists.
Let's play. Help me, fairies. Stay away.
I feel like, in a lot of ways, Destiny 1 and 2 will fall under the exact same fate as a Mass Effect game. As a game of service, it definitely has a higher chance of that happening, but
Let me weave you a lie.
but ideally you wouldn't want to see that happen, or the creators of the game wouldn't want to see that happen.
Stay away.
Right, let's do this, and then this.
I'm gonna rest.
See what this does before it dies. Stores 3 to the leader,
My word is my bond.
Time to dance.
and then hit that. Alright. I'll hit with that character. And then the turn. Next, we have a game on Steam called Escape Lab, which seems to probably be just an asset flip VR game more than anything else. $4.24 is way too cheap for a VR game. English, allegedly full audio. Nothing there of interest. This guy's just gonna keep on trying to hurt me. Let's go with one of these,
Let's play.
and then do this, then go and evolve here.
Done for. So sparkly. Yeah.
My word is my bond.
In the turn. Next, we have a game on Steam called Tokyo: The Tower of Perpetuity, which looks like a platforming game of really no interest. Even the anime characters aren't going to catch my interest here, as it looks just like a frustrating platforming game. It does have like the little donut platforms from Mario 3, it seems. That's what that looks like. Early access, $9.99, English, Japanese, Chinese. And the anime characters aren't drawn particularly well either. And then 1, 2,
Let's play.
evolve.
It won't be long now.
He's running out of cards, but I'm running out of life. Gamatsu has the same article here. We're talking about Tokyo Tower of Perpetuity, so we don't really need to talk about that.
Just say the word. See? Open wide. See? Open wide.
Let me weave you a lie.
Alright. See if we can win here.
Pale beside me.
I've lost. Next we have a game on Steam here called Banana Hell, which seems like a frustration platform with a foul-mouthed banana. Yeah, I don't think there's anything here. I think this is just a frustration platformer with a bad attitude. $1.94 English Volano. In all fairness, there might have been in the 90s a point where I would have been all for a banana with a bad attitude as a concept, or a character with a bad attitude in general as a concept. I don't know if I really am in that same mentality, though, that I think I'd want to see any of that. At this point, I'd argue that there's just too many people all over the place, all over the world, that have bad attitudes, and it's no longer cool. It's gotten played out and boring. Next, we have a Gamatsu article here. Toho Doll Draft announced for PC. Toho project characters become dolls and battle it out. This kind of sounds like a cell phone game more than a real game. But apparently that's yet another Toho project game, which seem to be quite a lot of them out there. Here we have a point-and-click adventure game, which you don't see very many of those from Japan. Almost never do you see a point-and-click adventure game, which, in all fairness, half of the visual novels, had they been labeled point-and-click adventures or been closer to point-and-click adventures, that might have been more interesting. But it's called Needy Girl Overdose, announced for PC. Foster girl who with a need for approval and an internet obsession. Okay. I don't know if that has particularly an appeal to it. Let's see what this looks like. There are some... Well, is the video going to play? I'll watch that and see if there's anything worth mentioning while we try to load back into the game. You're kind of looking at a slightly pixely image on a computer screen of a girl trying to be like a streamer. There was somebody I saw on one of the YouTube video game or computer PC master race groups that I follow saying, hey, I've got this computer, how can I make money with it? And I was about to say, I was thinking to myself, you know what, if you really want to make money on this computer that you spent $500 to maybe $1,500 on, the legitimate way to do that is to get a job that is a remote customer service job that you almost certainly would hate, where you would take phone calls and just file customer service complaints with. Of course, nobody suggested that. Everybody says, get an OnlyFans account, become a video game streamer. Like, everybody, including me, certainly feels like that is the way that everybody is going to be able to succeed, when in reality, almost nobody succeeds that way, and the ones that do succeed almost always cheat. Yeah, as I'm watching this video, this girl seems to get severely harassed. Needy Girl Overdose. Just watching the trailer. Which probably happens a lot. In all fairness, if I could manage to work a customer service job remotely without blowing my own brains out after about a month, I would consider doing that myself. But I did work a customer service job basically for 5 years, and it broke me mentally so much from it. But that is literally the only thing anybody wants to pay you to do, is to deal with other people that they don't want to deal with. In a weird way, a massive amount of the economy, I'd say around the world, is paying people the least amount possible to deal with other people that you don't want to deal with, because at the core of it, almost all jobs, all services, all offerings are slightly scammy. Whether it's a cell phone company that is ripping you off for data that they're nowhere near paying for it, and line upkeep that's nowhere that expensive, or whether it's some product that's being sold that the creators know is nowhere as good as they promise, or is defective completely, or a banking company that's ripping you off by charging you fees for doing literally nothing. And I could just give more and more examples. But moving on, we have a Gematsu article here. The 2D side-scrolling action RPG Lost Epic has been announced for PC. I don't know. 2D side-scrolling is an interesting thought. Certainly. This wants to load. Let's see. Well, I guess we have to do this. Then I guess we do that. And I guess we do that. Yep. I wanted this video to play, and I can look at the thumbnails. There we go. Yeah, this is an interesting idea. Going more 2D, maybe too much customization and too many characters. It has a nice visual polish to it. The enemies look nice and big. Looks like there might be a little bit of platforming, a little bit of puzzling. But yeah, that definitely looks interesting. So that's coming out in 2021. Although at a certain point, do I really need to put something on the fall list that's not actually out, or do I need to just hope that I see it when it actually comes out? I think I can probably just hope that I see it when it actually comes out, because particularly Japanese games tend to advertise themselves multiple times. Gematsu has an article here. The Silver 2425 is coming to Switch February 18th in Japan. Is that guy disconnecting or conceding or what? Let's go ahead and evolve this. Evolve this. There we go. 1, 2, 3. So this is a bundle of the silver case and the 25th Ward, the silver case. So these are just 2 games that are already available. The silver case is on Steam from 2016, and let's see. The silver case remake, the 25th Ward, came out in 2018. Those are games that I was going to eventually get around to playing. Alright, summon 2 fairies. Let's do that. Do that. Let's go ahead and evolve.
It won't be long now. I will protect the peace of the forest.
And then that. And that. Then that. And then that. And then hit that. Interesting. This guy just taking no damage. So each time this plays, it deals damage, but then protects them. Interesting.
For the queen.
Okay. If I lose, I think that would be incredibly unfair for him to be able to play the exact same 3 characters. And yet, that's exactly what's happened here. Okay, well.
This ends here.
By the light of the forest.
Do that. Get rid of that.
Here.
Hmm.
Leave this to me, fairy friends.
Hmm. You still can't win. Now, there's no way he should be able to play a 4th copy of the same card. So instead he plays a completely different card. Can take more than 4 damage, can attack 3 times per turn.
Now, jump into the wind.
And then apparently that gave rush to this character.
I won't waver.
Whoa, you're strong.
Wow. Well, see, that's some great ABS there. Alright, well, we only have a few more games to cover today, so I don't think I'm going to get all 5 of the treasure chests. And certainly tomorrow, I'm almost certainly not going to get all 5 of the treasure chests unless I just decide to waste a lot of time on it. Moving on, we have a Gematsu article here. High-speed sword combat action game Bavarian has been announced for PC. Which, okay, here you've got a big beefcake type character. Here you have a big beefcake female character. I think I kind of like it. It's a little bit of a furry spin on it too, but man, boy do we see the same kind of standard normal character so often that a little variety is appreciated. Now, I do think there might be a danger here in that this might just be a combat game on a round platforming, and you may just fight against 4 or 5 characters and that's about it. There is also a danger that this could be a grindy game where you're just finding the same 4 or 5 characters over and over again. But what I'm saying, I'm not hating it. Not hating that idea. Made by a single Japanese developer. Does that mean a single person, or does that mean a single development company? At that point. Well, that'll be interesting to see how that gets received when it comes out. That very possibly could also just be one of those games designed to catch streamers' attentions, and I could see somebody like PewDiePie playing it for a day and getting a bunch of attention because of that, and then people completely forgetting about it. Here we have a game called The Witch and the 66 Mushrooms, which is tagged as a Metroidvania game. And it doesn't look so much like a frustration platformer as much as it looks like a Castlevania game with where you get different abilities. It's a little weird that there's a white outline around the witch, and this is kind of like a very Western style witch character, but alright, fair enough. Most witches are based on that. Feels like kind of what you would expect Sabrina to have looked like before the many times that Sabrina the Teenage Witch got redrawn. It's $6.99 English and Japanese. I'm gonna put this on the follow list. We already got some positive reviews. I could see myself playing something like that, particularly if it's a fairly short game. Although a short Metroidvania game tends to be a disappointing Metroidvania game. Here we have a game called Untitled, which is tagged as a visual novel. And it does seem like that probably is what it is. The art looks fairly decent. It does seem like it is more Western than Japanese for a visual novel, and that's always interesting. English full audio and Russian makes it a little suspect, but there's enough polish here to put it on the follow list and see. Of course, the bigger question about how many, if any, visual novels I cover is still yet to be resolved and probably will never be fully resolved. Here we have a game on Steam called Shiro, which looks like it's pretty much a frustration platformer with spinning symbols. This might be a little too Japanese with the symbols being in Asian writing. I assume Japanese. This also just feels like it's too much frustration in general. Feels like there really is a game here. It's just one of the games that's not for me. I'm not seeing any real boss fights or anything, which might be a concern too. $4.24, English and Russian. And see, that is highly suspect as to why is a Russian developer or a Russian language game using imagery of Asian symbols. Although I guess in all fairness, a lot of Western companies also make games based around Asian culture. Next we have a game on Steam called Gold Dust, which looks like it is really just a Wolfenstein 3D mod. Yeah. The graphics here are just way too bad. See, if you told me this was an old game, maybe then I'd consider it, but then it still wouldn't have any relevancy because it's an old game I don't recognize and I don't think anybody else would recognize. It's 59 cents English only. That's easily dismissed. Got about 5 more tabs. Here we have a game called Inseparable. Or, yeah, I guess that's Inseparable. I almost thought it said Insparable. But, alright, I guess it's Inseparable. But to me, it looks mostly like just an asset flip game, low effort game. $2.39 English. I'm gonna just quickly dismiss it based on its visuals. Here we have a game on Steam called Pictioneer, which looks like a NES style Stardew Valley type game. Let's see. The idea of doing more Stardew Valley is probably not what I want to do. You can see it's mostly positive. It's early access, it's $19.99. It's English, Chinese, and Japanese. Although Chinese doesn't have an interface translated. This is just one of those games I have to give a pass to. If this looks interesting to you, by all means, it probably would work. If you love Stardew Valley, this probably would work. But there's a lot of other options if you like Stardew Valley, and I didn't like Stardew Valley at the core of it. Next we have a game called Pixel Maker Game Maker Series STEOS, Sour Song of the Bounty Hunter. That is a way too long of a title. And the game itself does not look particularly good. $9.99 English, Chinese, and Japanese. Take your pick on who you think made that bad game. Here we have a game on Steam called Dungeon of Nazarick, which looks like an actual NES game. And once again, it says it came out for 2020 as far as its release date, but that might be just like the PC release date of an old game. But it probably is brand new. $12.99 English only. Way too expensive, way too old-fashioned. The camera is zoomed out way too much. This is a Ghouls and Goblins clone, obviously, or Ghosts and Goblins clone. Next we have a game called Tier in the Library of Labyrinths, which is a JRPG. It's a JRPG that feels like there's probably an 18 plus patch on it to show nudity, and feels like it is just an RPG Maker game otherwise. It's $17.99 English, Japanese, and Chinese. Yeah, I don't think so on that. It's easily dismissed. I think we had mentioned this before, but OpenCritic has the article. Gamers will only be able to use 667 gigabytes of the PlayStation 5's SSD, which it means there's 825 gigabytes of onboard memory. So massive, fairly large amount of space there for a OS and possibly updates and patches to the OS. I wouldn't be surprised if actually of the 160 or so gigabytes that are being isolated to the operating system, I wouldn't be surprised if there is literally a core OS and then an updated space for updates and patches, and it just cycles between boot partition 1, then install the update to on partition 2, then boot to partition 2, and then when you get the next update, put it back to partition 1. And that might explain that 60 gigabytes for an operating system, particularly for a console, is much more reasonable than 160. But yeah, it's a little surprising. They also tore down the internal memory in the Xbox Series X, and hidden in the insides of the internal memory is a M2 stick that is just a Western Digital M2 stick. So theoretically, if you're willing to tear apart your Xbox Series X, you could put a bigger memory chip in there to have more space. You probably would have to use a data cloning software to clone the operating system and everything onto that. Also, you'd almost certainly have to use a physical adapter on the M2 stick because it is a extremely basically non-standard for consumer short millimeter length. The M2 sticks have multiple millimeter lengths, and almost certainly you're going to get the longest one that's available, not the shortest one that's available. But they almost certainly, I haven't actually looked, but I can almost guarantee you that there is an adapter somewhere that will give you a little ribbon cable you can plug into the end of the M2 stick, and then you would have to make some kind of custom mount. Probably you would want to do some custom cooling for a larger M2 stick. What they're clearly showing there is that they do not intend for you to update or modify the internal memory in the Xbox Series X, and then they told you that directly anyways. So nobody should really be surprised with that. They expect you to use the probably overpriced external memory slot, which will probably work just as good as the internal memory anyways. Lastly, we have a game on Steam here called TV Show Trivia. Even though this visual polish is pretty good for a trivia game, I still don't think you'd really want to play a trivia game on Steam. 84 cents is a decent price, English. It's based on Simpsons, Game of Thrones, The Office, Star Trek, South Park, Grey's Anatomy, Sopranos, and Seinfeld. I'd argue that there's probably not as much overlap with fans of Grey's Anatomy as there are fans of South Park or Star Trek. In fact, Friends also probably not so overlapped. So yeah, there's not enough TV shows and not enough trivia really for that to really make sense. Let's see, that brings me to the Humble Bundles. Let's see if there's any new Humble Bundles. I'm gonna just reload the page just to be certain that there aren't any new Humble Bundles. Wouldn't be surprised if there aren't, and that there won't be until like Black Friday. And then that brings me to my Twitter feed, and I'll go down my Twitter feed very fast and we'll see if there's any big news. And then that will be the end of this stream. Yep. I've been complaining about the my hip hurting sitting in my chair, and I have like an air cushion, and I stupidly have just had it pumped up, and I thought to myself as I started streaming today, it's like, you know what, I probably could just get a little bit more support if there was a little bit less firmness there. So I let the air out a little bit, and then all of a sudden my hip feels a lot better. And that's very ridiculous to have taken me that long to think about that, because I've been increasingly in pain for 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm like, man, my hip is just getting worse and worse and worse, and I'm like, oh yeah, well that's my own fault, isn't it? Yeah, it doesn't look like there's any new video game news. I wouldn't be surprised if we just had a small burst of video game news this weekend, and then we start to slow down a bit. There was a lot of games that came out for Steam, but the vast majority of them don't seem like they were really good. See, YouTube Buddy, the plugin for YouTubers, has a new feature for the best time to publish, and I might follow some of that information next time I start doing some scheduling, which I haven't even really thought about doing some scheduling, frankly. And I imagine new content creators are going to get very randomized results there. And even particularly in my case, since I seem to basically get a whole different audience and a different audience very often based on every time I change to a different game that I've pre-recorded and covered, there's very little consistency, I think, that can be ascertained, because I honestly don't think there's just a lot of people that just like my content that I make. They want to see the specific games that interest them, and then they go away, and maybe they come back, maybe they don't. The only thing that stays somewhat consistent is these live streams, and these live streams can often be a mess. Anyways, that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos, because that helps me with YouTube. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.